Okay, students, let's continue with our discussion of modern poetry. We've looked at Edwin Arlington Robinson, remember, with Miniver Cheevy and Richard Cory, and then we spent most of our time on Robert Frost and his poems. Now, these poets wrote in traditional forms. So what did we say made them modern? That their poems modern is the fact that they had an underlying melancholy, almost pessimism, especially those of Edward Arlington Robinson. Now, today we're going to look at more modern poetry. And this poetry is doesn't have the traditional form, rhyme, meter, all that. Today, open your books to page 464, and we're going to look at the Imagists. Just the word Imagists. What do you think their poems would highlight? And if you said images, you're correct. Briefly, hold your finger there and go back to page 441. In the second paragraph, you have the Imagist Creed. They try to do 6 things: to use the language of common speech, okay, but to employ always the exact word, to create new rhythms through free verse, to allow absolute freedom in the choice of subjects, to present an image through the use of details, to produce poetry that is hard and clear, never blurred and indefinite. And then number 6, to create as much possible, to concentrate as much as possible into the fewest words possible. So those 6 things. Now we're going to look at these poems on page 466 to 468, and we're going to see how they follow these Imagist rules. I'm just going to say maybe one thing about each poet. See, we did like 3 days on Robert Frost, but now we're going to do 1 day with these 4 Imagist poets. Ezra Pound, William Carlos Williams, H.D., that's what she goes by. Her name is Hilda Doolittle. And then Archibald MacLeish. So let's go to one poem, page 466. In a Station of the Metro by Ezra Pound. This poem is one of the shortest, yet one of the most famous Imagist productions. The Metro is the Paris subway, a setting that Pound imaginatively captures through a sharply focused metaphor. So, the introduction to the poem is longer than the poem. Here's the poem. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Yeah. Well, it is an image. It is putting as much as possible into a few words as possible. It is, let me see, what are those, what is the creed? To use the language of common speech, there's no word that we do not understand in that poem. To create new rhythms through free verse, there's no rhyme or meter. To absolute freedom in the choice of subject. What is the subject? The faces at the station in the metro. To produce poetry that is hard and clear, never blurred nor indefinite, to concentrate as much as possible into the fewest words possible. So Ezra Pound definitely does that. Let me just say a couple of things about this poem. What is the main image? The main image is a metro train coming to the station and the people waiting on it. We've got the apparition. You know, he could have used like an appearance of these faces, but it's apparition, so it's kind of like ghostly. And he calls the apparition, the faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Can you see a wet black bough, and can you see petals on it? That's what the train station, the metro, looked like to him, okay? So you have a metaphor there. The faces of the crowd are petals on a wet black bough. Okay, let me see if there's anything else. The imagery is the people's faceless with ghostly imagery. As an apparition, they appear and then vanish. Pound describes the faces metaphorically as petals. Both images play on the white-black contrast created in this dark underground setting. Okay, so there you go for Ezra Pound in a station of the metro. All right, let's go to Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams. All right. Now, when you read this poem, it's like a snapshot. Click. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. I wish we were in class right now. I can see you giggling. Yes. Does he describe it with common speech? Yes. Free verse? Yes. Choice of subject? Yes. It's like you looked out the window, saw a wheelbarrow, wrote about it. An image through the use of details? Yes. Poetry that is hard and clear, like just words that we can see. I mean, it's like when you see this poem, click. It's like, you know, an image. This is an image. An image. You just write about it, whatever it is. I should have had a few other objects here to take a picture of your mind and then just describe it. Let's see. So we have the red of the wheelbarrow and the contrasting white of the chickens make the image especially concrete and easy to visualize. You have, I'm not going to go over anything about the form. Lack of punctuation. Which Imagist tenets does this poem fulfill? All of them. Let's see what question 4 says here. How well does Williams' poem satisfy the Imagist rules for poetry? It's simple, it's precise, it's concise, it's clear. So, by the way, whereas Robinson's poems and Frost's poems kind of had a meaning, they had a lesson, they had something that they were trying to say. These poems don't have anything that they're trying to say or a point that they're getting across. What are they doing? They're just describing the object. Let's go on to Heat by H.D. O wind, rend open the heat, cut apart the heat, rend it to tatters. Fruit cannot drop through this thick air. Fruit cannot fall into heat that presses up and blunts the points of pears and rounds the grapes. Cut the heat, plow through it, turning it on either side of your path. Look at the verbs. Rend, cut, rend. Cut the heat, plow through it, turn the heat. So all of these verbs are short, choppy, intense. They are forceful. Okay. The heat in this case is a solid object that is being described. It can be cut, torn, and divided. It presses against the fruit. It shapes the fruit. Is this like dry heat or humid heat? It's humid heat because it's thick and it's heavy and it can be cut and rendered. There you go. Let me see if there's another question. How does HD develop a tactile image in heat? She pictures heat as a solid object. Okay. You do have poetic devices here. You have alliteration and sound devices. And really, in all of these poems, you might find some of that. All right, now let's do Ars Poetica by Archibald MacLeish. Ars Poetica, whose Latin title means the art of poetry. So this guy's telling us what poetry should be. Aptly defines and expresses the Imagist theory of poetry. This poem, which has been called a fitting epitaph for the movement, particularly illustrates the modernist idea that poetry should not include didactic elements, but exist solely as art of the object. A poem should be palpable and mute, as a globed fruit. Dumb as old medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, leaving as the moon releases, twig by twig, the night-entangled trees. Leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory, the mind. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to, not true, for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf, for love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem should not mean, but be. Now, he does have a lot of imagery in this poem. But one thing about it, it seems like he's not just taking a picture of it and describing something. He is trying to tell us something in it. It's kind of ironic that he's saying that a poem should just, it should not mean anything but be, but he's kind of telling us that that's what a poem should do. You know, understand what I'm saying? He's doing the opposite of what he tells us. So it kind of, he's telling us that a poem shouldn't have a didactic point or whatever, but his does. So he's contradicting that imagistic ideal or whatever you should say. All right, maybe you could come up with a poem, an Imagist poem. Just pick an object, describe it cleanly, precisely, shortly. It doesn't have to have a meaning. You can just say something. You can just give us a picture in our mind. You want to do that? Somebody put a couple in the comments or whatever. Okay. Have a great day.